if Jerusalem is the city of God, if it is the holy Zion where God is someday going to reign, why would God say, woe to you, O Jerusalem, woe to you, O Ariel, woe to you, O Lion of God? If you understand that, then you understand the character of God. You understand the reign of God, the justice of God, the righteousness of God. We'll look at it today. The battle that rages for Jerusalem, beloved, is really, in essence, Israel's fault. The fact that they have been kicked out of the land, that they have gone into captivity 2 different times in 586 BC and 70 AD is really Israel's fault. It's their fault because they didn't trust in God. It's their fault because they thought that they could get away with their sin, and they said, the Lord doesn't see us, and they forgot that He is the potter and they are the clay, that they don't determine their own destiny except through obedience and submission to the potter. Well, we have come to Isaiah chapter 29, and we need to cover this whole chapter in this whole program, so we better get moving. Remember, we are in the segment of woes, 6 woes from chapter 28 through chapter 33. So for the next couple weeks, we're going to be looking at these woes, but just know this, that there is a lesson for you and for me in all of this. Isaiah chapter 29, verse 1, woe, O Ariel, Ariel, the city where David once camped. Ariel means the lion. It says, add year to year. Observe your feasts on schedule. Go ahead, year after year, go ahead. Go to the temple, celebrate your feasts, make sure you're on schedule. But know this is what he's going to say. I will bring distress to Ariel, and she will be a city of lamenting and mourning. As a matter of fact, when you read the book of Lamentations, what you read about is the mourning and the lamenting of Jerusalem, of the people of Jerusalem, after God destroys them and takes them into captivity under the Babylonians. He says she will be a city of lamenting and mourning. She will be like an Ariel to me, like a lion to me. I will camp against you, encircling you, and I will set up siege works against you. In other words, an enemy is going to lay siege to your town. An enemy is going to try and go over your walls. And I will raise up battle towers against you. And then you will be brought low. I mean, you are going to be brought low. It says, from the earth you will speak. You will be so low that you'll be on the ground. And from the dust where you are prostrate, you've got your face in the dirt. Your voice will be like that of a spirit from the ground. And your speech will whisper from the dust. In other words, I am going to bring you low. He's not talking about just the buildings of Jerusalem, but he's talking about the people of Jerusalem. He is talking about his judgment on Ariel, on Jerusalem. It says, but, and here's a wonderful contrast, but the multitude of your enemies will become like fine dust, and the multitude of the ruthless ones like the chaff which blows away. And it will happen instantly, suddenly. In other words, there's going to come a deliverance, but that deliverance is going to seem to come out of nowhere. It's going to be like an earthquake that happens. It's going to be like a tornado that comes. It's going to come suddenly. from the Lord of hosts, you will be punished with thunder and earthquake and a loud noise, with whirlwind and tempest and a flame of consuming fire. And the multitude of all the nations who wage war against Ariel. It's the battle for Jerusalem. Even all who wage war against her and her stronghold and who distress her will be like a dream, a vision of the night. In other words, your deliverance is going to come suddenly. All the nations are going to gather around you. All the nations are going to come against you. But all of a sudden, your deliverance is going to come. It's going to come just like that, like thunder, like lightning, like an earthquake. And then when that happens, listen to what he says. It will be like a dream, a vision of the night. It will be as when a hungry man dreams, and behold, he's eating. But when he awakens, his hunger is not satisfied. Or as when a thirsty man dreams, and behold, in his dream, he is drinking. But when he awakens, behold, he's faint. And it says, and thus the multitude of all the nations will be who wage war against Mount Zion. In other words, they're going to be here, and all of a sudden, they're going to be gone. They're going to be dealt with. He says, be delayed and wait. Blind yourselves and be blind. They have become drunk, but not with wine. They stagger, but not with strong drink. For the Lord has poured over you a spirit of deep sleep. He has shut your eyes, the prophets. He has covered your head, the seers. The entire vision will be to you like the words of a sealed book, that when they give it to the one who is illiterate and says, please read, and who is literate and say, please read, he will say, I can't, I cannot, it's sealed. And then the book will be given to the one who is illiterate, saying, please read this. And he will say, I cannot read it. Then the Lord said, because, listen carefully, because this people draw near to me with their words. They're going up year after year. They're keeping the feast. They're saying the hallelujahs. They're saying and quoting the Psalms of Ascent as they go up. He says, and because they draw near me with their words and honor me with their lip service, but they remove their hearts far from me, and their reverence for me consists of tradition learned by rote. In other words, they are going through the motions of the religion, but their heart is far from me. They are going through tradition. They have learned it by rote, but they don't know the book. They don't understand. And if they open the vision, they can't understand it. Why? Because God is a righteous God. God's throne is justice. His measuring line is justice. His level is righteousness, and he has to deal with Israel's sin. And it is coming. It is judgment. It is coming against Jerusalem. There's a battle for Jerusalem, and they are going to have all the nations come around it, but all of a sudden, as the lightning comes from the east to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Now, I want you to get this down, and if you have your map that we have been working on all week, what I want you to do is I want you to put on there the dates of the destructions, first of all, of Samaria, which was 722 BC when they were taken captive by Assyria. They were taken into captivity. In 586 BC, so let's just draw a line from Jerusalem over to a place on your map that's in your free study guide that you downloaded by going to preceptsforlife.com. Right, the first siege is 586 BC. Almost 100 years after Isaiah's ministry and prophecy is ended. He tells them that this is going to happen. He tells them, he prophesies the future. He tells them how they are to live, even when they're in Babylon. But it doesn't happen while he's living. So in 586 BC, they go into captivity. Now, this is recorded for us in 2 Chronicles chapter 36. So you might want to write that down so that you have it. 2 Chronicles chapter 36, and we want to start, I believe, it's about verse 15. So let's look at it. It's the last chapter of 2 Chronicles. And this is what it says. It says in verse 15, the Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again, talking about Jerusalem, again and again by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and his dwelling place. That's the temple. But they continually mocked the messengers of God. Now remember, he has just spoken to them. We saw it in our last program. He's called them scoffers. Scoffers and mockers are basically the same thing. They mocked the messengers of God. They despised his words. They scoffed at the prophets until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Therefore he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on them. And you can read it later. And it goes on to say in verse 20, those who escaped from the sword he carried away to Babylon, and they were servants to him and to his sons until the rule of the kingdom of Persia. So he tells us about the destruction of Jerusalem. And that destruction of Jerusalem is prophesied about by Isaiah. And yet, you know what? It doesn't happen in Isaiah's time. It happens in 586 BC. And yet, this is not the destruction that he's talking about. It is a destruction where they lay up their siege ramps and all of that, but there's no sudden deliverance like we see described in Isaiah. Why? Because Isaiah is taking us beyond this one, beyond the second one, beyond the third one, or to the very third and final destruction of Jerusalem, when all of a sudden, the Son of Man comes in all of his glory. Take a break, but don't fail to come back. The battle for Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem, happened in 586 BC. As we're looking at Isaiah chapter 29, God is pronouncing, woe, O Ariel, woe to you, Jerusalem, the city where David camped. And it is the city that David conquered. It was a Jebusite city. And David went up and he conquered that city. And then he had his son Solomon build the temple on the site of the threshing floor that he bought from Arnon. That was God's gift to Israel. It was the place where they were to put their temple. It was the place where God put his name. It was the place where they were to worship God. It was the place where they were to come up to 3 times a year to keep the feast. They were going through the motions, but their heart was far from God. And so finally, God brought the destruction of Jerusalem. The first one happened in 586 BC. Now, there was another one that was yet to come. And that second one happened in 70 AD, in the year Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord. So when it happened there, I want you to know, it happened on the very same day of the month, and the very same month, on Tish B'Av. The temple was destroyed in 586 BC and in 70 AD. just now as Jesus had prophesied in Luke chapter 21. Because remember, Jesus is not only the Messiah, he is not only the priest, he is not only the king, but he is also the prophet. And if you will look at Luke chapter 21, in Luke chapter 21, Jesus is speaking, and this is what he says in verse 20, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize her desolation is near. And it says, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those in the midst of the city must leave, and those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. And then he goes on and he talks about there will be great distress on the land and wrath to these people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword. They will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. And so what you have is you have the destruction. This is Solomon's temple in 586 BC. It's Herod's temple in 70 AD where Jesus worshiped, and it is destroyed then. But there is a third destruction coming, and this is the destruction that I believe that he's referring to in Isaiah, because all of a sudden there is deliverance. And that destruction is when? It's a question mark. It's a question mark, but it could be as soon as the temple is rebuilt. There has to be a rebuilding of the temple. And do you know that there are a group of Jews, the Temple Mount group, that are preparing the vessels for the temple? Do you know that they want to build the temple where the Dome of the Rock is, where Al Aqsa Mosque is, where you see that golden dome? That's where it was before. The Arabs, the Muslims, say, no, you cannot build it there. Why? Because remember at the beginning of the week, I talked to you about the Muslim faith, and they have a Muslim space. And once they buy a piece of land, they consider that it is theirs forever and ever and ever, and they are willing to defend it to the death and kill any infidel that seeks to take it. So if they're buying a mosque in your neighborhood, you know that they consider that theirs under their law of community and their law, and they are saying that it is never to be possessed by a Gentile, by an infidel. So you can know this. All right, now, in Matthew chapter 24, and it sounds so similar, but it is a different time. In Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is giving a prophecy, and he says, when you see the abomination of desolation, and this is verse 15, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, etc. It says in verse 21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will be. And if they say, behold, here is the Christ, or there he is, he says, don't go. He says, for just as the lightning goes from the east and flashes to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Verse 30, and it says, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. I believe this is what God is referring to in Isaiah chapter 29 when he talks about the deliverance. Now, if we were to go, and we don't have time, but if we were to go to Zechariah chapter 12, you can do it after the program, or Zechariah chapter 14, you will see that he's going to gather all the nations against Jerusalem. He's going to bring all those nations against this holy city of God. There's going to be a battle for Jerusalem. Then the Lord himself will go forth to fight on that day, and the Lord will be king over all the earth. Beloved, we win. Beloved, no matter what you have to go through, no matter whether you have to suffer for your faith, no matter whether you endure martyrdom or not, you can know this. There is a God in heaven. He is the Almighty potter, and we are the clay in his hands, and we will have victory. He says in Isaiah chapter 29 that these people are serving me with rote and tradition. And my question to you today, beloved, is this: is your religion rote or is it real? Is it a religion or is it a relationship? Are you going through the motions? Do you consider yourself a Christian? What else? You were born in America. Well, there's a lot of what else in America now that are not Christians. Do you have a rote religion or do you really know God? So he goes on to say, I will once again deal marvelously with these people, wonderfully marvelously. And he's talking about how he's going to judge them. And he says, woe to those who hide their plans from the Lord, whose deeds are done in a dark place. And they say, who sees us? Who knows? He says, you turn things around. Shall the potter be considered as equal with the clay? That which was made should say to his maker, he did not make me. Or what is formed, say to him who formed it, he has no understanding. And this is what he does, is once he calls us to understand that God is the potter and that he sees what's going on, in verse 17 to 24, he tells us about that glorious day of deliverance. When on that day, verse 18, the deaf will hear the words of a book, and out of their gloom and darkness the eyes of the blind will see. The afflicted will increase their gladness in the Lord. The needy of mankind will rejoice in the Holy One of Israel. For the ruthless will come to an end. The scorner will be finished. And indeed, all who are intent on evil will be cut off. Who cause a person to be indicted by a word, hate crimes. You said it, you go, and you serve the punishment. And know this, that the hate crimes will protect us, protect the Muslims from anything being said by us about the fact that Jesus is the only way. He goes on to say, therefore, thus says the Lord, who redeemed Abraham concerning the house of Jacob. Jacob shall not be ashamed, nor shall his face turn pale, but when he sees his children, the work of his hands in his midst, then they will sanctify my name. Indeed, they will sanctify the Holy One of Jacob and will stand in awe of the God of Israel. Those who err in mind will know the truth, and those who criticize will accept instruction. Why? God will be here in all of his glory, reigning in Jerusalem, his city, the city of Yehovah, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the future. You look at the sunshine, you look at the beautiful day, you look at God's creation, and it brings a peace to your mind until all of a sudden you remember what a scoffer did to you. You remember how someone came against you and with just a word twisted you and brought you pain or maybe caused you to lose even your freedom. And all of a sudden, it's like there is no sun in the sky. Oh, precious one, remember this. The Son of Righteousness, S-U-N, of righteousness, is going to arise with healing in its wings. This is the promise of the last book of the Old Testament, the book of Malachi, that tells us that Messiah is coming. So when we look at Isaiah chapter 29 today, when we think about what is my precept for life, what am I going to live by? I want to read to you what is going to happen to these scorners, to these ruthless people. It says, the ruthless will come to an end, and the scorner will be finished. Indeed, all who are intent on doing evil will be cut off, who cause a person to be indicted by a word, and ensnare him who agitates at the gate, and defraud the one in the right with meaningless arguments. In other words, here are people that are judging, and their judgment is twisted, perverted. Here are people that are ensnaring you with a word. Here are people who are defrauding you with meaningless arguments. You're innocent, but you are declared guilty. He says all of that is going to come to an end. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that wonderful? God is going to reign on the face of this earth, and all the kingdoms are going to be brought into subjection to Jesus Christ, and every knee will bow and every tongue will confess someday that Jesus is Lord. Do it now.
Thank you for watching today. All the programs you see on Precepts for Life are available on CD and DVD. To order your copy of today's program, log on to our website at preceptsforlife.com. To download your free copy of the study guide or to find out more about Precept Ministries International, click on our website or call us today at 1-800-763-1990. Join us for our next program.
If Jerusalem is the city of God, if it is the holy Zion where God is someday going to reign, why would God say, woe to you, O Jerusalem, woe to you, O Ariel, woe to you, O Lion of God?
Join us for our next program as we discover more Precepts for Life.